Hi everyone! This video is going to be about the term eclectic pagan and the question of authenticity that arises from that. Another thing I missed while I was on vacation was a dialogue that arose within the YouTube pagan community about the term eclectic pagan and whether it can sort of act as a mask for a sort of academic laziness, or I'm not sure that anyone has actually used the phrase, but a form of fluffy bunny paganism. So this conversation was initiated by Feather Gardenbelle. I wasn't actually subscribed to her before I kind of heard about this conversation that had been going on. I watched the video response by Kellyanne at the Four Queens, and then I went over and watched the original video. And I know that Violet Kat made a video as well, but I actually haven't gotten around to watching that yet, so sorry about that. I'll go and watch that probably this evening. So basically, Feather Gardenbelle in her video, she kind of complains about the term eclectic. She actually describes herself as an eclectic pagan, and I think in this video she's basically saying that she isn't sure about using that term because she feels that it has some sort of negative connotations, or that she's not very happy about the company that she feels she keeps with that label. So she complains about people using the term ringing true to you, that people they will say that they do XYZ, they believe XYZ because it rings true to them, and that this is a sort of excuse for making things up. She basically says that they feel as though they can do whatever they want, regardless of facts or regardless of previous experience and things like that. So basically I feel as though the major issue that's coming up here is a question of authenticity or lack thereof when it comes to people who use this term eclectic pagan. And the question is sort of arising as to whether their practices should always be based on book study and on particular traditions, and whether there's any space for people to really truly just find their own way when it comes to religious and magical practice. I will say now that in her video, Feather Gardenbelle does actually state that she's not religious herself, which actually made me wonder why she actually uses the term pagan at all, because to me I would understand the term pagan to be inherently religious. I would think of Wicca as being alternatively called pagan witchcraft, in that it contains the two elements of both witchcraft and paganism. So to me, witchcraft is witchcraft. Witchcraft is the magical element of it, and paganism to me is the religion. But obviously that's not how everybody understands the term pagan, and obviously the term pagan, it's highly disputed, it's a very broad umbrella term, but that was something that surprised me. But basically what I'm saying is that I'm coming to this from a very different perspective. I'm not a magical practitioner at all, or I don't consider myself to be. Although my practice is based largely around ritual, I don't really do anything that I would call magic, or currently anyway, I'm not personally using that term. So I suppose I'm coming to the term eclectic pagan from a very different perspective. I'm coming to it from a perspective of seeing these people who call themselves eclectic pagans as people who are eking out a spiritual practice, a very religious practice that is in some way eclectic while being pagan, rather than being just a form of witchcraft or magical working that isn't in any way religious. And maybe there's a difference there. Maybe there is, I think for people who have a magical mindset, that probably looks quite different than for me with a completely naturalistic mindset. This topic very definitely links in with the topic of my last video, which was about labels, where I was basically agreeing with Kellyanne in that I don't think they're necessarily important in our spirituality. They're sort of useful in order to help us to engage in dialogue with other people, but they're not necessarily important to us in defining ourselves to ourselves. There's definitely been a lot of talk recently in the pagan community about authenticity and drawing the line when it comes to paganism, whether that's about drawing the line ethically speaking or drawing the line in terms of specific labels, in terms of what paganism encompasses, and people are sort of deciding that they don't want to be within the pagan umbrella anymore, or that they really never were, and all that kind of thing. So there's a lot of this kind of stuff coming up. I think the question of labels and the question of authenticity, they're really inextricably entwined. Authenticity is a word that is important to me, I think you could say, but only really from the perspective of being authentic to myself and to oneself. And I suppose being authentic to the ways in which we understand the world, and being authentic to our scientific understanding of the world as well as our magical one, if those are our two worldviews that we're sort of tying together in our practice. I am definitely an academic. When it comes to pretty much anything, I will come at it from an academic point of view. I've spent quite a lot of time in university at this point, and it's just my natural impulse. I like to intellectualize about things. So obviously book study to me is hugely important, and book study is a major component of my spirituality. It is perhaps the most important component. Obviously, in terms of practice, it's all about ritual and meditation and things like that for me, but I wouldn't be where I am now if it wasn't for the copious amounts of reading that I have done over the past, not only the past year, but really the past 10 years. It's kind of come and gone. I've read less, I've read more about spirituality and religion and paganism. And then over the past year or two, maybe the last 2 years, my reading has really kind of stepped up a level. And everything that I've developed for myself has been absolutely and utterly based on that reading. But that's not to say that I haven't made it up, because I have. My entire religious practice is made up. It has been developed in line with my own sort of emotional reactions and responses to things that I've read. And although certainly certain books and certain people's practices have been more influential than others, I still very much feel as though there is no spirituality out there that is quite like mine, and it is very much mine. And when it comes to writing ritual and deciding what kind of shape my practice and my ritual is going to take, I'm not looking at other people's work and other people's experiences and saying to myself, right, well, that is the way I have to do it because that has a long line of tradition, because that works for other people. That's definitely not the way I'm coming about it. I do things because they seem meaningful to me, and I try them out. And if they don't work for me in ritual, if they leave me feeling cold, or for whatever reason I'm unhappy with them, I let them go. And that's led to a lot of chopping and changing in my practice. My ritual outline, I do actually keep a document of this. My ritual outline is, I don't actually have I do have notebooks that I journal in, but in terms of notes, kind of practical notes on my ritual structure and ritual poetry and things like that, all of that is kept on my computer. And I kind of documented the changing of this ritual over the past year. I've kept the original drafts rather than just copying over them, and it's very interesting to me to look back now at where I was at a year ago and to see how much that's changed. So essentially what I'm saying is, I don't think you can get much more intellectual than me when it comes to religion, unless you're actually an academic, a religious studies academic. But I completely disagree with the idea that paganism can't be just made up by somebody, and that we have to follow specific guidelines or specific practices that have been proven to work for other people, because at the end of the day, we're not those other people. I think what's most important to me for people not to be sort of making up are things that are actually scientifically provable in some way. Now, obviously, proving science, proving anything is limited, but you know what I mean. Anything that is actually historical or is in some way scientifically, in some way can be tested scientifically. I don't like to see people just going along with the first thing they read in a book, going along with the first thing they've heard online or whatever. I feel very sad when I see people using the term witch without understanding what the background of that word actually is, what the etymology actually is, how it was actually used over time, and how it's become the word it is today. A huge amount of people don't understand that. A huge amount of people still believe in the sort of mythology or the myth that was created by Gerald Gardner when he was creating Wicca. Well, I say creating Wicca, I suppose it was more of an amalgamation of a lot of different material, but that's a totally other topic for another day. So yeah, I don't like to see people assuming that things that they are told are true without doing any reading or any investigation themselves. And I think it's perfectly fine to not delve any deeper, as long as you don't kind of drop anchor completely at one specific idea, as long as you are open to the idea that what you've read or what you've learned might actually be false, and I mean scientifically or historically. Of course, when it comes to the metaphysical, there is no such thing as false, and there's no such thing as true in my personal opinion. This is where it gets a bit complicated. I'm definitely coming at this from a naturalistic perspective, and maybe the problem here is that I don't actually believe in a lot of metaphysical stuff that other people believe in. It's not that I think it's completely impossible or completely implausible, that's fine, and it's not to disrespect anybody who comes at things from that mindset, who works magic, who uses crystals or anything like that. It's just not something that is a part of my practice, and it's not something I believe in. So I definitely I'm wary of being too dismissive, or I'm very wary of being disrespectful of people when I say this. But I really think that even for people who absolutely do believe in the metaphysical, who believe in magic, who believe in, say, in crystal healing and all that kind of thing in a very literal way, I understand that there's quite a broad spectrum of belief when it comes to that kind of thing, and I definitely I'm not completely dropped off the edge of it. Like, I would just say that I'm very far over on one end of the spectrum, in that I take a very psychological perspective. But I think even for people who are way over on the other side of the spectrum from me, I think it's important for them to remember that at the end of the day, it is all made up because it's not provable. And that's kind of the joy of it, really, isn't it? When it comes to anything spiritual or religious or metaphysical. The whole point of it, to me, or the whole reasoning behind it, is that we are engaging with something that isn't provable. We are engaging with something that isn't understood, that is perhaps even beyond human understanding. So, almost by definition, metaphysics is made up. There's no other way of going about it. Now, obviously I understand that there are certain traditions and there are certain practices that have been done repeatedly over years and years, going way back. And I'm not saying that those practices aren't valid and that they aren't perhaps they do work more frequently than other practices that haven't been verified so much or used so much. I mean, things like cunning folk, the cunning lore, going way back, any sort of traditional magic from any society or culture, and things like ceremonial magic. Obviously there are things there that they're quite set in stone, and they are things that people have done throughout the ages. And if people want to pick up on that and run with it and stick with that because they see that other people have done it and it's worked for them, then more power to them, that's great. And I have no problem with that. I absolutely don't. And I'm not saying that that's not valid, that it's not viable, or even that it's not true. I'm definitely not saying that it's not true, but I am saying that it is made up. We've come up with it ourselves. And I mean, you could even say that things like science are made up. Of course they are. We have made it up. Science is just one big conglomeration of metaphor and mathematics and theory, and it is all made up. The difference between the metaphysical and science is that science is easier to test, and we can be more sure about it being true or not because it's easier to test, and because we've come up with parameters by which to test those kinds of things. So essentially, I mean, I don't even think that scientific fact can ever be 100% proven. Nothing in this life, by human standards anyway, can be 100% proven. So even more so when it comes to religious and metaphysical things, I don't think any of it can be put forward as fact. And I don't think it needs to be. I don't think it needs to be in order to be valid, and in order to be important to people, and in order to work. So while I understand that the kind of people that are being targeted with this kind of, respectfully with this rant, are the kinds of people who, you know, the kind of newbies who come onto YouTube and say, teach me everything you know. They watch 2 videos and they start calling themselves a witch, and, you know, they buy a couple of crystals and they say, oh, I think this does this, without really any reasoning behind it, or any meaning behind it, or even any personal experience behind it. I think it's probably fair enough to assume that people like that their practice is shallow, or that it's not particularly true, because they haven't even come at it from a place of personal experience, or they haven't actually, there's no depth to it maybe. But that's definitely not true of everyone who comes out with that kind of statement of, I do this and I believe this because it rings true to me. And I think that's very important to remember. I would have to imagine that the kinds of people who really come to paganism, come to witchcraft, without any depth to it, without really feeling any major seriousness about it, I would have to imagine that they're in the minority. And I wouldn't even feel as though that they are doing any harm to anybody, or that they can be completely dismissed either. That's just, as Kellyanne says in her video, she kind of makes this point that, you know, that's their path, and yes, okay, maybe they're never going to move on from that, and maybe there's not any particular reasoning behind what they're saying, and they're coming out with stuff and saying this is true because it rings true for me, and maybe that is irritating to people because these people are not exactly coming at this from a learned perspective, whether that be book learning or personal experience. But I definitely don't think that this needs to take away from the authenticity of the term eclectic, or from other people who call themselves eclectic pagans. In her video, Kellyanne does say that perhaps people are afraid, pagans are afraid, that this kind of thing and these kinds of people are going to give paganism a bad name, and eclectic paganism in particular a bad name. And I suppose that is something I can understand, because I would be wary of attaching myself to labels that would suggest something that isn't true of me. But like Kellyanne, I feel that it's really, really important for people to feel as if they can basically do what they want and not have to fit into a specific tradition or a set of rules, or comply with a certain way of doing things. With spirituality, I really feel that the most important thing is for people to feel that what they are doing is true for them, and that they can just go with whatever feels right and go with whatever comes from heart level for them. I think it's kind of dangerous to be saying that that people can't do that, or that it's in some way less authentic for people to, you know, come to conclusions or feel certain things about spirituality or magic, if it's only something that they've you know, made up. Eclecticism to me is all about feeling comfortable with using everything that you're interested in, everything that is important to you, and bringing that all into your spirituality and not being afraid to do that, and not feeling as though, oh well, I can't do that because it doesn't fit with that label, or I can't do that because Wiccans don't do that, or pagans don't do that. You know, like, don't get caught up in these labels, don't get restricted by them. I think too often people just place themselves in little boxes, and they just get really restrained and restricted by a specific tradition or a specific type of paganism that they have initially come across and thought, yes, that's me, that's what I want to be, that's what I want to emulate. And then maybe a year down the line, things about it just aren't quite fitting, and then there can be an awful lot of guilt then about feeling as though, oh, I was so sure that this was for me, but now I'm not altogether sure that I really connect with the 4 elements, or I'm not altogether sure that I want to be casting a circle, or whatever it might be. Personally, I think if somebody believes in crystal healing and they pick up a rose quartz and it speaks to them of dark energy, then go with it. Absolutely go with it, you know, why not? Okay, if 99.9% of people are saying that rose quartz makes them think of love and friendship and healing and that kind of thing, I don't think that should take away from your own personal experience of something. Obviously the crystal example, it's not relevant to me, but what is relevant to me is feeling tied down by specific traditions' take on deity, for example, and feeling as though because I'm not a polytheist that I can't engage with deity, or even feeling as though I have to explain everything, and that everything that I do has to kind of be in line with things that I've read, or that I have to have, for example, a psychological explanation of everything that I'm doing or everything that I'm experiencing. Because at the end of the day, I think if you can't be free and wild with your spirituality, then where can you, you know? I just feel that your spirituality should be an expression of the deepest parts of you, the most passionate parts of you. And it should encompass all of those things about which you are truly passionate and which really make your heart sing. And if we start associating eclectic paganism with something slightly negative or inauthentic, then we're shutting a lot of doors on an awful lot of possibilities. Personally, I've never used the word eclectic to describe, oh no, I lie. In the last couple of years, I haven't used the word eclectic to describe my practice. Originally, I actually did about 10 years ago, when I first kind of started delving into Wicca and paganism. I think I was describing myself as an eclectic Wiccan for a while, just because my practice and my beliefs didn't quite tie in with the traditional Wiccan practice or beliefs. But I still think it's a very powerful word, and I think to let go of that would be an awful shame. I think the word eclectic sort of offers a bridge between organised religion and our own very personal spirituality. I think that's a very important bridge to be able to make. Because yes, obviously I think that our spirituality is intensely personal and should be intensely personal, but an awful lot of the time you need a starting point. Perhaps everyone needs a starting point, and a lot of the time you have that starting point because there is a religion that really speaks to you, or even just a collection of beliefs or practices, or, you know, an area that really speaks to you, and you kind of want to build on that or work from there. And it can be nice to have a religion to sort of turn back to and to engage with that community and things like that. So I think being able to call yourself an eclectic pagan is really powerful, because it's allowing you to not get trapped into trying to stick with common neo-pagan practices or beliefs, allowing yourself to maybe incorporate things from other religions and even other things outside of religion. At the end of the day, we're all just trying to find our own story. That to me is the most important thing about my spirituality and about life in general. As human beings, we're always telling stories. We're always trying to figure out ways to understand everything around us. And I think having the freedom and feeling the freedom to make things up and still feel authentic is just so important. So important to us in our spirituality and in our religion and in life in general. So I hope that struck a chord for some of you. Thanks for listening, guys. I'll talk to you soon.